Hi everyone, thank you very much for joining our workshop. I'm Gwyneth Woods
And I'm Nikki Sturgeon.
and we both work for the Northern Health and Social Care Trust here in Northern and we wanted to speak to you just about our bereavement comfort call service. So I am just to share my screen, all being well, so you can see my presentation there. So hopefully all of you can see that okay. So we a new service in the pandemic, and this was our service, the Bereavement Comfort Call volunteer service that began last year. Let me just, oops, there we go. And I just wanted to start by giving you a wee bit of a background to the service because it really was instigated by the pandemic. Although, in saying that, as the bereavement coordinator in the trust, it's something that I felt would be of help for a long time beforehand. So I suppose the pandemic gave us that opportunity. And there was a regional context because in March 2020, whenever the pandemic began, there was a recognition that families weren't able to be with their loved ones at end of life. And we in the health service weren't able to really spend that time round the time someone died and afterwards, providing some support and a little bit of comfort. So across the region, different trusts developed something similar in different ways. And in our trust, it was using redeployed staff initially from March up until about July, the beginning of July in 2020, where we had redeployed staff who were able to make calls to families. But of course, that was only ever going to be a short term because those staff were needed back then in their substantive roles. So that gave us a wee bit of a gap, but it also gave us a model that we could work on. And we were very fortunate in that well, I suppose it was fortunate in one sense, but unfortunate that we weren't able to continue with a planned volunteering service that we had developed. It's an end of life care model, but it did mean that volunteers needed to be present in the hospital. And with the pandemic, that wasn't going to be able to be moved forward. And the funding for that had come from Marie Curie and Helpforce. So we had the opportunity then in the summer to say, well, could we actually use that funding for something that would be able to be provided remotely? So that was the money then that we were able to use to begin the Bereavement Comfort Call service in September 2020. And really, as I say, as a result of the pandemic. So how did we make it happen? It all had to happen actually quite quickly. And that in itself had some challenges. But one of the key things that really happened from the beginning was that we had a steering group chaired by our director of nursing. And they were crucial and have continued to be crucial throughout this service. We have met monthly, and very much they would be involved in the decisions and the development and the support that has been required to really get this program up and running. And we would have had in the steering group a very wide representation. So we had representation from the funders, Helpforce, and from crews who gave a lot of support in relation to training, etc. But also we had a volunteer rep on it. We had senior representation from the trust, and we had representation from ward sisters, charge nurses, etc., and even information governance. So everybody coming together, that really set the tone, I suppose, for the internal partnerships that we had within the trust. They were really important because that was how we troubleshooted all of the issues that we didn't even see coming at times. One of the other things that was a real challenge was how did we do this remotely? Due to COVID, we couldn't bring volunteers into one place. So, one of the first things that happened in the August was a process mapping day, and that was held along with information governance, who really steered us in the systems and processes that we would need to do this remotely, because obviously there's very confidential information that was going to be passed, because we were going to have to link volunteers up with information about families whose loved one had died, and they really guided us in setting. It was a foundation that we needed to get this going. We also had very close liaison with our IT department, because we had no idea how we were going to do this. How, when a volunteer's sitting at home, do we give them confidential information? So Egress was the platform that was used in our trust, and it's a secure system to transfer information. And we had never heard of it. So we needed the IT department to really hold our hands on that. We also then developed, and this very much developed as time went on, a communication plan. This was both internal, so that all senior managers, ward sisters, etc., were aware of, engaged with the service, but it also then included communication with the public. We initially started with social media, etc., and then as time went on, we strengthened this with a leaflet for families, which we'll talk about a little bit later. We had to then develop a DPIA and a risk assessment and an operational process map, which was very much a work in progress as the service started, and then it continued up. So that was really how we kind of got things going, and very much, I suppose, our internal partnerships. But in that first year in particular, the external partnerships were equally as important. As I've said, Helpforce and Marie Curie provided the funding, but also by linking with them, network of other trusts who were involved in the UK-wide project, where the funding came from. And that helped us, well, what are others doing? What worked for them? What worked for us? Could we share good practice, etc.? Volunteer Now, and George has been a part of our steering group throughout, have been a very strong partner with us. And they, between themselves and crews, in particular around recruitment, we had to get this service up and running very, very quickly. And without them, we would never have been able to recruit the volunteers that we did. They've supported us greatly in that. And then we also worked with crews initially in getting our training on bereavement up and going with the volunteers. And they have really supported us and helped us to take that on ourselves more recently. And probably one of the things that we didn't think about so much at the beginning, but has become increasingly important, was our existing network that we had with our local community and voluntary organisations. We weren't starting from scratch, because we did, myself as the bereavement coordinator, I had very good relationships with those locally, but they became even more significant when we were having to signpost people to very diverse issues and concerns, to the appropriate organisation or support mechanism that would help them. So those have only strengthened really throughout the project. So then, what about the volunteers? Their induction, their training, their supervision, everything has been virtual. It's very strange now. Some of our volunteers have been with us since September 2020, and I feel, I know some of them very well, and yet we have never met. It's a very strange thing, but it has been so important, albeit virtually. And almost everything we've done, we have used Zoom to do so. And it's again a strange one, because on reflection, we in the Northern Trust cover quite a big geographical area, but we do have volunteers now for this service that are from right across the whole of Northern Ireland. And whether they would have even been able to engage to that extent if they'd had to travel, whether it be for supervision, for training, or to provide the service, it probably wouldn't have been the case. So the fact that actually some of the things are virtual works quite well for those that live a bit further away. So initially in August 2020, there were 10 volunteers recruited. So bearing in mind that we started really thinking about this service in the July, the volunteer coordinator came into post in August, recruited 10 volunteers, and the service started in September. So it was very, very, very quick. And that was, it had to be very quick. But then by December, we realized things were getting very difficult. As I'm sure you all remember, the surge over last winter was incredibly difficult, and sadly we were having to make increasing numbers of calls to families. So by December we realised we needed to go out and recruit again, which was challenging in itself, because we were incredibly busy as a service, and then we were needing to do some recruitment. But we were able to expand the number, and we had a further 10 recruited by the beginning of February and up and running. We had the same volunteers right through to the start of this summer. But then, as things have opened up, we have noticed a slight change, because our volunteers' lives have become busy again. Some of them, their jobs have become increasingly busy. They've made responsibilities, their social life, they can go on holidays, those sorts of things over the summer. So we did begin to see that volunteers just weren't able to maybe take as many calls, but also that we had a little bit of attrition. So from the start of the summer until about now, 6 of our original volunteers have moved on to other things. So we've just completed a third round of recruitment, and we've just recruited 12, which brings us up to 26, which is probably the threshold for the number of hours that our volunteer coordinator has, because there's quite a significant amount of not just supervision and connection with the volunteers, but actually with the coordination of the service as well. So in relation to our training, we provide 2 half days initially. One is our trust-led induction, which Nikki would lead on, and we would provide some practical information about the service, etc. And then the second is very bespoke in relation to bereavement. And as I said, crews really supported us in our first 2 waves, and they've been very supportive in kind of advising us, and we've been able to take that in-house and do that training now this last time. Something that we've been learning all the time with this service, and I suppose we learned it from the first set of volunteers, that when we did the second recruitment, we added in a third optional Zoom session. So they would have their 2 days of training in the 1 week, or the 2 mornings. But then the following week, we offered a Zoom where we let them come along if they just wanted sort of to consolidate that information. If they had been ruminating on some of it and thought, well, actually, could you remind me what that was again? But the most important element of that was we also brought our existing volunteers, and that gave them the opportunity to have a very frank and open conversation with them. How did you feel? What was that like? What do you get out of the service? And they have found that very beneficial. Then, in terms of kind of settling in, whenever the volunteers have made their first call, we make a point of having a contact. So they get a follow up conversation with myself or the volunteer coordinator just to see how did that feel. And then it's really very flexible. Everybody gets that one call, and then we leave it up to them. And we find that some of our volunteers will really need maybe a few weeks of us having those one-to-one phone calls with them, encouraging them, talking through their calls just until they find their feet. Other volunteers do their first call, feel very comfortable, and off they go. They always know they can ring us, but some of them seem to kind of hit the ground running quicker than others, and that's absolutely fine. And then all of them at the end of a month get a one-to-one conversation with us as well, a settling in conversation just to check that they're okay and everything's fine. Probably along with those kind of Zoom conversations and the structure around it, the other thing that has really benefited us was the setting up of a WhatsApp group. Now, of course, nothing confidential would be shared in the WhatsApp group, but it has really created it was set up first of all as a communication tool, but it has really created a sense of community. And the sort of communication we would have would be, the volunteer coordinator might put a message in on a Monday morning saying, who can take calls this week? How's everybody fixed? Friday, she might sort of say, right, I've got everybody's calls back, so thank you. But actually, it has turned into more than that, because that Monday morning will be, hi everyone, it's Monday. Hope you had a good weekend. Isn't it a lovely day? It has really built a sense of kind of purpose around it. And on a Friday, it's lovely because she puts the message in to thank everybody, and the volunteers come back. Hope everybody's going to have a nice weekend. What's anybody doing? So there's a wee sense of community around that. But it's a very handy way of just checking in if there's a quick question, and that's the group. But also then there can be those individual one-to-one WhatsApps for just a quick wee check-in. I've sent my call through. Have you received it okay? Can you give me a ring? That call was difficult, or whatever. And the volunteers all know that there's somebody at the end of the phone, um, either myself or the volunteer coordinator, any of the hours that they would be making calls. Then the other thing that has really gone down very well with the volunteers are any additional training opportunities that have come up on the trust. So that could be, we had a communication skills, sage and time workshop, and we explored could our volunteers attend that, and a lot of them chose to. Um, the good grief work week, different things that have come up. They don't have to go to them, but a lot of them, because of the reasons that they chose to volunteer in this type of way, those topics interest them, and they have been very, very open to them, and really, really grateful to have the opportunity for their own further development. And then the biggest thing that we have discovered along the way is the importance of their self-care and the recognition that they need that support. They have been absolutely phenomenal, but I think it is a very challenging role. And what they would tell us is that they find it challenging but very rewarding. perceive as the most important element that enables them to continue. Somebody actually said at their supervision session recently that they wouldn't still be here if they weren't getting the right sort of support from ourselves. So we've really worked hard at that. And I mean, for instance, after the surge last winter, probably around March time, Nikki was able to secure some funding for us to get somebody external to come in and do a sort of a self-care relaxation session with them, and we did that over 2 different evenings, and they absolutely loved it. And it just set the scene for them that we recognize and we promote self-care. We have a monthly supervision via Zoom, again, because that's over and above what the trust requires in relation to our volunteering policy. That is optional. Some people will come all of the time, some people will come some of the time, and it's up to them if they want to. Part of it is us passing information, so if there's any updates or anything new to tell them, it's us checking in to see how everybody is. But actually, it's also that opportunity for them all to talk to each other and to reassure each other. And that has become incredibly important as a way for us to promote their self-care. They're doing that as well. I'm not going to dwell on the kind of nuts and bolts of the service or the call, simply because you'll all maybe be doing different types of services. And I'm very happy for anyone to get in touch with myself. And I know Nikki would be the same if you want to know an awful lot of detail. But just to give you a bit of a flavour of what the service is, basically, the volunteer coordinator for a start gets daily data on the deaths that have happened in hospital. That's maintained on a spreadsheet. She makes up individual forms for every family that will go to the volunteer. She looks up additional information, when's the funeral, those sorts of things. She transfers that form via the secure system to the volunteer. The volunteer needs to complete that after they've done the call and upload it to the coordinator. She will action it, so she might send out bereavement packs, refer to a chaplain, etc. And she will then maintain the records of that. So there's a fair bit of coordination of the service that our volunteer coordinator does, as well as the support and coordination of the volunteers themselves. Then what is this call that happens? It is one telephone call that's made to the next of kin of those who die in hospital in the trust. To make that call in and around the first week, 5 to 7 days really. It is what it says in the tin. It's a bereavement comfort call. It is condolence, a listening ear. How are you? We're really sorry to hear about the loss of your loved one. Um, the listening piece will go on as long as the family want. And then there's a bit more, there's sort of practical information. We would have found in the past, before the pandemic, that we were able to give some practical bereavement information to all of the families because we were with them in the ward. But then, of course, with the pandemic, that may have changed. Not as much now as it was previously, but it really was important to us that families would have written information to back up what they'd been told on the ward. So we can check in with the call. Did you get that? If you did, we can signpost to it. Did you see this information, etc. Depending on what the conversation has brought up. Or if not, we can offer to post that out and make sure they get it. We have recently had memory boxes and photo books, and not everybody is going to be open to that. We find that an awful lot of people, when we ring them, say, "Oh, that's so nice that you rang. We really appreciate it. It's so great to know we haven't been forgotten. We're okay. We're well supported. Thank you very much." And that's fine. And then there's the slightly smaller proportion who say, "Oh my goodness, we really they would indicate that they maybe don't have a lot of support. They have very practical questions, etc." So we would very much tailor the call around what the person's needs and wishes and issues are. If somebody is open to talking, I suppose that's where we'll offer the memory box or the photo book as another way of somewhere for the family to put their, and we would talk through that with them. Our lead chaplain will also offer follow-up call if that's what somebody would want. So we would offer that signposting. In more recent times, we've also offered a follow-up call where the family would be open to, again, probably those where they're maybe a little bit more isolated or not able to speak to their family, and they would like us to ring them back in a couple of weeks. And then the other thing is signposting. And it may be signposting because they don't know how to cancel their mother's pension. And we will direct them to the Department for Work and Pensions bereavement call service, or it might be further down the line after the follow-up call we feel they still need some support and we could refer a signpost to crews, for instance. So it varies depending on the call. And then the other thing, which is a little, I suppose, added bonus, which isn't why we set up the service, and we certainly don't ask families how the care has been or what way things have gone for them, but we do find that the volunteers are told information. So it could mostly be positive, such and such in the ward was absolutely fantastic, this made such a difference to us, would you please tell them? And then we can feed those compliments back to the ward. Or occasionally they'll pick up an issue where somebody is angry or somebody has not been able to get the property or there's something has gone on, and we can then go back to the ward and see if we can get that addressed. So that's the sort of stuff that we cover on the call and that really is addressed. Again, I don't want to blind you with this busy slide, but it's just to let you see that it has developed into what it is now. It was certainly a standing start, and we really felt that at the beginning we weren't sure how long it would go on or what it would look like, but it just gradually evolved over time. One of the things, I suppose, that changed and we strengthened as we went along was our network working with support systems. So for instance, we discovered there was a rural support network which specifically had support for those who lived who were from the farming community. So there's different things that we've discovered as we went along and we've been able to share with our volunteers. Then January and November, as I've said, we had a further recruitment of our volunteers, and that really helped us change what we were able to do. So in March, because we had a few more volunteers, we were able to spread from the 2 acute hospitals to include our community hospitals. We have 4 of those, and we were able to ring the loved ones who died, of those who died in the community hospitals. Then come April, because the surge was over and we had a few more volunteers, that was when we were able to introduce the follow-up calls because we had a bit more capacity to do that. We were very fortunate that the Loneliness Network in the Trust offered us some funding for the memory boxes and the photo books. So we developed that as an additional little enhancement. And then really delighted that when we did a business case come August 21, whenever our original funding was finished, we secured funding for a further year to August 2022. Okay. That is just a picture, not great picture, but of our memory box and our photo book. They are absolutely lovely. They're empty. The memory box is empty, but there's a little sheet that goes with it to the families to give them an idea of how to start. And it's very interesting because sometimes our older next of kin who have young grandchildren will be open to it, but they seem to like the idea of the photo book and working through that as going to be therapeutic for them. Whereas those who maybe have children of their own are the ones who will take the memory box, but they have flown off the shelves basically. Again, some more data just for that first year. We have about 77% of those whose loved one dies in the hospital that we are able to reach. Now, most of the time what happens is we phone the number that we have, and to keep our volunteers safe, we do put 141. We make sure they put that in front of their number, so they never have the volunteer's phone number. And of course, that means for the people we're ringing, it is a no caller ID. And we do think that some people don't answer because of that. So what we do is if there's a facility to leave a message, they will leave a message to say when they will call back. And a good few times that will work. The person will then answer the call, but sometimes they still don't. And we have to respect that they may not wish to engage with us because these are relatively cold calls. So what we do then is we send a bereavement pack out with a compliment slip with my details so that they are able to reach in if they choose to do so. We're content enough that for those that we aren't successful with, that we're at least reaching out to them, and if they need us, they will contact us. We had 58 follow-up calls since April 2021, not a huge number, but over the last couple of months, we've had to suspend those again because our numbers have gone up and our volunteers have gone down, but we're hoping to pick those up again very shortly. As you can see, we have a large number of bereavement packs posted, particularly in those early months. whenever people weren't able to be in the hospital with their loved ones. And actually, the photo books and memory boxes are now all gone. Our first raft of 100, and we're on to our second lot. We've had about 10% of people choose to be referred to the chaplain, and then we've had again about 10% of compliments fed back to service leads where they've specifically told us they would like us to do that. So, what were the challenges? Remote working. Probably initially, we've got very used to it, but that was a challenge initially. And the use of this egress system, because our volunteers have all come on board with different abilities and different experience around IT. And some of them have just said, yes, egress is great, it's no problem. And some of them would say to me, the calls are no problem. It's the IT system that causes me the challenges. So those volunteers have been very stoic and stuck with it, but they have maybe needed a wee bit more support around that. We discovered then also we should have thought of it at the start, but we didn't. The need for a leaflet to inform next of kin in advance. And that is still a little bit of a challenge because it is a cold call, because we do very much promote the service, and the ward sisters and charge nurses are very engaged with this. But staff just don't necessarily remember to say to somebody, you'll be getting a phone call. And families may well not look near their bereavement pack or look at their leaflet in those early days of bereavement, which is very understandable. So when we're ringing, they maybe don't expect the call, but they've actually accepted it very well when we explain where we're ringing from. We also had to develop a distress protocol. Again, that was something kind of as we were going, we thought, gosh, we need this. And that was quite challenging because we did this in partnership with our colleagues in the mental health division, and they were saying, oh my goodness, you're phoning people and you haven't, asked them, can you phone them? And you don't necessarily have an address for the next of kin all the time. So we had to really work through that, but we got there in the end. And mental health division ourselves and all the volunteers are very comfortable with our little protocol if they ring someone who's incredibly distressed and they're concerned about. Our surge created pressures, and we needed further volunteers very quickly at a time when we didn't really have time to recruit. And it is a challenging role. It is a very challenging role. I don't think just anybody could pick up the phone and ring someone and not know kind of what they're going to face at the other end of it. And some of our professionals in the trust have said, they are in awe of what our volunteers do, because they are just so measured in how they do it. But that in turn, of course, means we need to be very, very vigilant in supporting our volunteers, both on that day-to-day basis when they might have a challenging call, but also going forward, that we encourage them to take breaks. We encourage them, if they need a week off, that they take that, etc. And then positively, biggest positive is that we're still here, that we've had further funding from the trust to August 2022. The families are so grateful, and that's the biggest thing they keep saying to us, oh, you haven't forgotten about us. The volunteers themselves rate whether they feel the call was positively received, and consistently throughout the whole service, it has been 97.6%. It's gone between 97 and 98% every time. The onward signposting referral to many services, it has been positive. The volunteers themselves report a significant satisfaction in the role, and it was interesting that was mentioned earlier today. And they report positive feedback on being supported. So they have reported more recently as well that they felt very supported. The ward staff. This is not why we do it, but in a very challenging 18 months, the ward staff have really valued the feedback when they do receive it, because they feel they're not able to do what they did before. And for our volunteers and our volunteer coordinator, they were so chuffed in being successful in winning 2 of the Health Force Champion Awards recently, which gave them all such a boost. They were just ecstatic. The WhatsApp group was going mad that weekend, I have to say. Um, that's all very factual, and I could talk all day about stories of that would touch your heart. But I'm just going to use this one example. And this was actually where a gentleman needed a couple of wee answers about his care, his loved one's care. And we managed to link him up with the lead nurse. So actually, this feedback came via the lead nurse. So after she had a conversation with him and answered his questions about what had happened, he gave her some feedback on the bereavement comfort call service. And she came back to us and said that this person described the caller, which is one of our volunteers, as an angel. They felt like a weight had been lifted off their shoulder after speaking to them. They could not thank her enough for how she took time to listen to them, to empathise and understand. He felt that someone was showing compassion during a time of shock and grief. And it's amazing that is not an isolated piece of feedback. It is amazing how I think the volunteers feel very humbled whenever the people they are calling thank them and say that they rang at just the right time and they've made a difference to them that day, because they see what they're doing as a simple phone call and just what anyone would do. But they are absolutely incredible, I have to say. So at this stage, I would like George to join us on the stage, if that's okay. George Gillespie is going to, I think, coordinate if you have any questions. I have no idea at all where I am with time or how I rattle through that.
I think you're okay, Gwyneth. Your time is impeccable as usual.
I'll just stop
Can I
sharing
just,
here.
on behalf of volunteers and for those of you joining us in this breakout workshop, thank Gwyneth and Nikki, but also a really big thank you to the volunteers involved in this service. I've been part of this and worked alongside Nikki and Gwyneth from the very beginning of this, and I've been in volunteering and working with volunteers for over 20 years, and this is probably the proudest service that I have ever been involved in. Such a compassionate role, such a fantastic role, and to be set up during a pandemic, and the way it was run, the professionalism, all online, as Gwyneth alluded to at the very beginning. None of these volunteers have ever met any of us face to face. It has all been online, and the success just breeds itself. So learning from today and being prepared for tomorrow, what a fantastic service in terms of future volunteering, for people being able to do it from their home, but still receive best practice support and supervision and real professional support from the Trust. So well done to you guys, and thank you for joining us today. Has anybody any questions for Gwyneth or Nikki regarding anything to do with the service, or any questions at all? The rounds of applause are flying up through the screen there. Yeah, I often find when I attend this session that all of the information shared is so great that you really don't have any questions because everything has been answered for you. But has anyone any questions at all? Okay, great coverage. I'm not seeing any questions.
And if any, I was just going to say, if anyone, because I know I kind of skimmed over the how, but if anybody was interested in something similar or needed information about that type of a service, please do get in touch. There's no problem.
So some lovely messages coming in there.
That's nice.
From everyone that has joined. So yeah, once again, thank you very much, everyone. And Lucy, I think I'll hand over to you in terms of DigiLeaders. We don't seem to have any questions. Do we just leave the workshop now, or?
We can head back to the networking mode, and then if everybody can move back to the main room, I think there's time for a networking break there.
That's great. Okay, thank you.